You speak because you believe your words matter, because you think filling silence makes you valuable. But every word you utter is a confession of your desperation or desperate plea to be seen, to be validated, to matter in a world that has taught you that noise equals importance. Listen to yourself in conversations. Really listen. Notice how quickly you rush to fill the void when someone stops talking. How desperately you offer your thoughts, your opinions, your very soul to anyone who will pretend to listen. You've been trained like a performing animal, conditioned to believe that your worth is measured by the frequency of your contributions, the volume of your presence, the constant output of your mind. But what if I told you that every word you speak diminishes you? That every explanation you offer, every justification you provide, every desperate attempt to be understood is actually a small death of your power? You've confused communication with weakness, mistaken openness for connection. The world has convinced you that silence is emptiness, that those who don't constantly speak have nothing to offer. So you fill every pause, answer every question, respond to every provocation, like a puppet dancing to invisible strings. Your voice has become background noise in your own life. People tune you out not because you're boring, but because you've made yourself too available, too predictable, too eager to please. They know exactly what you'll say before you say it because you've trained them to expect your constant performance. You've become the person who speaks just to speak, who offers thoughts that were never requested, who fills comfortable silences with unnecessary words. Tonight, you discover why your voice has become your greatest weakness, not because you lack intelligence or insight, but because you've weaponized it against yourself, turned it into a tool of your own diminishment, a mechanism of your own psychological enslavement. You tell yourself that speaking is connection, that sharing your thoughts creates bonds with others. But look deeper every time you explain yourself, justify your actions, or rush to fill an uncomfortable pause. You're not connecting. You're bleeding power into the void, offering pieces of your soul to people who never asked for them and will never truly value them. Connection isn't found in the multiplication of words, but in the careful curation of which words deserve to exist in the world. Watch yourself in your next conversation. Notice how you lean forward when you speak, how your voice rises slightly when you want to be heard, how you unconsciously seek approval in the eyes of others. You've become addicted to the brief hit of validation that comes when someone acknowledges your words. Even if that acknowledgement is hollow, even if they're simply waiting for their turn to speak, this isn't connection, it's performance. You're not sharing your authentic self. You're presenting a carefully constructed version of who you think others want you to be. Every word becomes a small betrayal of your true nature, a compromise between what you actually think and what you believe will be acceptable to your audience. You've learned to edit yourself in real time, to soften your edges, to make yourself palatable to people who wouldn't recognize authenticity if it stood naked before them. The uncomfortable truth is that most of your words are not communication, but compensation for feeling unseen, unheard, unimportant. You speak to prove you exist, to convince others that your thoughts have value, to demonstrate that you deserve space in this world. But compensation always reveals the wound it's trying to heal. Each word you speak is a small surrender, a tiny defeat you don't even recognize. You've been conditioned to believe that silence is emptiness, that those who don't speak have nothing to offer. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood that the person who speaks first reveals their hand, their needs, their vulnerabilities. You've been showing your cards your entire life. In every conversation, You're the one who breaks first, who offers information, who reveals your position before understanding theirs. Think about the most powerful people you know. Notice how they speak. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't over-explain their decisions. They don't justify their actions to people who haven't earned the right to judge them. They understand something you've forgotten, that words are currency, and like any currency, their value diminishes when they're printed carelessly and distributed freely. You've been living in psychological inflation, devaluing your own words through oversupply. Every time you speak without being asked, every time you offer your opinion to people who didn't request it, every time you explain yourself to someone who hasn't demonstrated they deserve an explanation, you're participating in your own devaluation. You're training the world to treat your thoughts as common, your insights as disposable, your voice as background noise. The person who speaks constantly is never mysterious, never commanding, never truly heard. They become part of the furniture of other people's lives, reliable, predictable, easily ignored. You've confused availability with value, mistake presence for importance. But true power isn't found in your ability to fill space with words. It's found in your ability to create space that others feel compelled to fill. When you speak from desperation, from the need to be heard, from the fear of being overlooked, your words carry that energy. People sense it unconsciously. They feel your need, your hunger for validation, and it makes them uncomfortable. Not because they're cruel, but because desperation is repulsive to the human psyche. It triggers something primal that makes people want to retreat, to protect themselves from your emotional neediness. You mistake verbal intimacy for genuine connection, believing that sharing your inner world creates closeness. But notice how cheaply you give away your thoughts, your plans, your fears, scattering your essence like coins before strangers. Real intimacy isn't found in the words you share. It's found in the sacred spaces you protect, the mysteries you preserve about yourself. You've been offering your pearl before swine, casting your most precious thoughts into conversations with people who couldn't recognize wisdom if it whispered directly into their souls. Every time you share something deeply personal with someone who hasn't earned that level of access to your inner world, you're not creating intimacy, you're creating imbalance. You're giving more than you're receiving, investing more than others are willing to match, offering parts of yourself that should be reserved for those who have proven themselves worthy of such gifts. True intimacy is built on scarcity, not abundance. When you make your thoughts, feelings, and inner world easily accessible to everyone, you create intimacy with no one. The person who shares their deepest fears with a casual acquaintance has cheapened the very concept of depth, made the sacred common, transformed what should be precious into what becomes disposable. You've convinced yourself that openness is vulnerability, that vulnerability is strength, that strength creates connection, but you've misunderstood the nature of each. Openness without discernment is not vulnerability, it's carelessness. Carelessness with your inner world is not strength, it's weakness. And weakness, disguised as connection, creates relationships built on your diminishment rather than mutual respect. The people in your life have learned to expect your constant emotional availability, your willingness to share, your eagerness to connect. They've come to see you as a source of entertainment, validation, or emotional labor, rather than as someone whose inner world is a privilege to access. You've trained them to take you for granted by making yourself too available, too transparent, too eager to please. When you scatter your thoughts like seeds in rocky soil, don't be surprised when nothing grows. when you offer your inner world to people who haven't cultivated the wisdom to appreciate it. Don't be shocked when they trample it carelessly underfoot. Silence is not empty space waiting to be filled. It's concentrated power waiting to be wielded. When you withdraw your voice, you create a vacuum that others feel compelled to fill. Watch how they scramble to understand your quiet, how they project their own fears and desires onto your stillness. Your absence of words becomes their obsession. In a world addicted to noise, your silence becomes magnetic. People don't know what to do with someone who doesn't need to speak, who doesn't rush to fill uncomfortable pauses, who can sit in quiet without fidgeting or apologizing for the space they occupy. When you stop offering your thoughts freely, something shifts in the dynamic of every relationship. People begin to wonder what you're thinking, what you know, what wisdom you're keeping to yourself. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects their own insecurities, their own need to be heard, their own desperation for validation. Notice how uncomfortable others become when you don't immediately respond to their statements, when you let their words hang in the air without rushing to acknowledge them. They begin to fill the silence themselves, often revealing more than they intended, exposing their true motivations, showing you exactly who they are when they think no one is carefully listening. Your silence forces others to confront themselves. Without your constant verbal reassurance, your eager responses, your quick acknowledgements, they're left alone with their own thoughts, and most people cannot bear that isolation. They'll say almost anything to escape it, reveal almost anything, to fill the void your absence creates. This is not manipulation, it's revelation. You're not forcing people to expose themselves. You're simply creating the conditions where their true nature can emerge. When you stop performing, stop entertaining, stop filling every silence with your nervous energy, you allow others to show you who they really are. The person who has learned to wield silence understands that most conversations are not exchanges of ideas, but competitions for attention. When you remove yourself from that competition, when you stop fighting for space in the conversation, you elevate yourself above the battle entirely. You become the observer rather than the participant, the judge rather than the performer. People don't value what's freely given, they crave what's withheld. Your constant availability through words has made you invisible, unremarkable, taken for granted. But when you become verbally scarce, when your thoughts become rare commodities, something shifts. They begin to wonder what you're thinking, what you know, what wisdom you're keeping to yourself. Scarcity creates value. When you make your words rare, they become precious. When you make your thoughts exclusive, they become sought after. When you make your attention selective, it becomes coveted. You've been operating under the false belief that generosity with your words creates appreciation. But generosity without discernment creates contempt. The person who gives their thoughts to everyone values their thoughts at nothing. The person who shares their insights with anyone who will listen teaches others that their insights are common, unremarkable, easily replaceable. Think about the people whose words you remember, whose opinions you seek, whose thoughts you value. Are they the people who speak constantly, who offer their views on everything, who fill every silence with their observations? Or are they the people who speak thoughtfully, deliberately, who choose their words carefully, who make you feel privileged? When they share their inner world with you, your words have become like water, essential, but valueless because of their abundance. But when you create scarcity, when you make people work for your thoughts, when you force them to earn your insights, suddenly your words become like wine, rich, complex, worth savoring. This shift doesn't happen overnight. You've trained everyone in your life to expect your constant verbal availability. When you begin to withdraw, when you stop filling every silence, when you become more selective with your thoughts, they'll resist. They'll try to draw you back into your old patterns, to make you feel guilty for your newfound restraint. But this resistance is proof that your silence is working. They're not upset because they miss your wisdom, they're upset because they've lost their source of easy validation, their reliable audience, their guaranteed response. Your silence reveals how much they depended on your words, not for their content, but for their consistency. When you stop being everyone's verbal comfort blanket, you force them to find their own sources of validation, their own ways of filling silence, their own methods of processing their thoughts. Most will struggle with this transition because they've become dependent on your constant availability. There's a magnetic quality to those who speak little but say much. Your silence becomes mysterious, your rare words precious. People lean in. When you finally choose to speak, hanging on every syllable because they know it's not given lightly, you transform from background noise into a voice worth waiting for. The person who has learned to ration their words commands attention in a way that constant speakers never can. When you finally do speak, people listen not because you've demanded their attention, but because you've created the conditions where your attention has become valuable. Your rare words carry weight because they're born from consideration rather than compulsion. People sense the difference between words spoken from desperation and words spoken from choice. They can feel the power behind carefully chosen phrases, the authority behind deliberate silence, the strength behind controlled expression. When you speak after a period of meaningful silence, your words land differently. They don't compete with the noise of constant chatter, they cut through it. They don't beg for attention, they command it. They don't seek validation, they provide insight. This transformation doesn't require you to become cold or distant. It requires you to become selective. Your warmth becomes more precious because it's not freely distributed. Your insights become more valuable because they're not carelessly shared. Your attention becomes more meaningful because it's not automatically given. People begin to earn your words rather than expect them. They start to value your thoughts because they understand they're not entitled to them. They begin to appreciate your presence because they realize it's a gift, not a given. The seduction of the unspoken is more powerful than any argument you could make, any explanation you could offer, any justification you could provide. Mystery is magnetic in a way that transparency never can be. This isn't about becoming mute, it's about becoming strategic. You learn to ration your words like a master craftsman rations precious materials. Each sentence becomes deliberate, each conversation calculated. You speak when it serves you, when your words carry weight, when your voice can shift the balance of power in your favor. Strategic silence isn't about withholding communication. It's about understanding that communication is a tool, and like any tool, its effectiveness depends on how skillfully it's wielded. You begin to ask yourself questions before speaking. Does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said now? Most of the time, the answer to at least one of these questions will be no. This simple filter eliminates the vast majority of unnecessary words from your vocabulary. When you do choose to speak, your words become weapons of precision rather than tools of desperation. You speak to accomplish something specific, to gain information, to shift perception, to establish boundaries, to create particular outcomes. Your conversations become exercises in purposeful communication rather than random expressions of whatever happens to be on your mind. You learn to distinguish between speaking and communicating. Speaking is what most people do, the random release of thoughts, opinions, and reactions without regard for impact or purpose. Communicating is what you do, the strategic use of words to create specific effects, to accomplish particular goals, to influence outcomes in your favor. This strategic approach to communication requires you to develop patience, to sit with your thoughts before releasing them into the world, to consider not just what you want to say, but what effect your words will have on the person hearing them. You become a student of human psychology, learning to read people's needs, fears, and desires, so you can craft your rare words for maximum impact. Your conversations become chess games, rather than verbal ping-pong matches. Every word is a move, every silence a strategic position, every response a calculated step toward a desired outcome. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop participating and start orchestrating. Silence becomes your mask, your shield, your weapon. Behind your quiet exterior, others project strength, wisdom, hidden depths. They can't dismiss what they can't fully understand, can't manipulate what remains partially hidden. Your restraint becomes their fascination. Your mystery becomes your authority. When people can't read you completely, they assume you're more complex than you might actually be. When they can't predict your responses, they assume you're more intelligent than they initially thought. When they can't easily categorize you, they assume you're more powerful than they're comfortable acknowledging. Your silence creates a screen onto which others project their own assumptions, fears, and desires. The quiet person in the room becomes whatever others need them to be: wise, dangerous, mysterious, powerful. Without your constant verbal self-revelation, people are forced to imagine who you are, and they almost always imagine someone more interesting than the person who can't stop talking about themselves. This projection is not deception on your part. It's revelation on theirs. Your silence doesn't lie about who you are. It allows others to reveal who they are by showing you what they assume, what they fear, what they desire in another person. The mask of silence protects you from the judgment that comes with constant self-revelation. When you speak constantly, you give others ammunition to use against you. Every opinion you offer can be contradicted. Every belief you express can be challenged. Every vulnerability you reveal can be exploited. But when you remain strategically quiet, you become difficult to attack because you've given others so little material to work with. Your silence becomes a form of armor that protects you while simultaneously intriguing others. They want to know what you're thinking, what you believe, what moves you, but they have to work for that information. They have to prove themselves worthy of your thoughts before you'll share them. This doesn't make you cold or calculating. It makes you selective and self-protective. You've learned that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, that your thoughts are valuable resources that should be invested wisely rather than spent carelessly. Watch how differently people treat you when you stop feeding their need for constant verbal validation. They begin to perform for your attention, offering more of themselves to earn your response. Your silence creates a stage where others reveal their true nature, their insecurities, their hidden agendas, all while you remain safely protected behind your chosen quiet. The shift is subtle at first, then unmistakable. People who once took you for granted begin to court your approval. People who once interrupted you begin to wait for you to finish your thoughts. People who once dismissed your opinions begin to seek them out. Your silence creates scarcity where there was once abundance. Your thoughts become valuable because they're no longer freely available. Your attention becomes precious because it's no longer guaranteed. Your approval becomes meaningful because it's no longer automatic. Others begin to compete for your rare words, your occasional insights, your selective engagement. They start to notice when you're quiet, to wonder what you're thinking, to question whether they've done something to lose your interest. This isn't manipulation. It's the natural result of creating value through scarcity. The people in your life reveal themselves in how they respond to your newfound verbal restraint. Some will respect your silence, understanding that you're quiet. Doesn't mean you have nothing to say, but that you've chosen not to say it. Others will be frustrated by your refusal to fill their need for constant verbal stimulation, revealing how much they depended on you for entertainment rather than genuine connection. Your silence becomes a filter that separates those who value you as a person from those who valued you as a performance. The people who truly care about you will adapt to your new boundaries, will learn to appreciate the weight of your rare words, will understand that your silence doesn't indicate absence, but presence of a different kind. Those who can't handle your strategic quiet were never really interested in you anyway. They were interested in what you could provide for them, how you could make them feel, what you could offer to their emotional needs. When you stop providing constant verbal validation, they reveal their true relationship to you. You are no longer the person who feels awkward, pauses, or explains themselves to make others comfortable. Your presence itself becomes the message, self-contained, requiring nothing from anyone. People sense this shift in your energy, this new gravitational pull of someone who has learned to hold their power instead of scattering it through careless words. This transformation in your presence is felt before it's understood. People notice something different about you, even if they can't articulate what it is. You carry yourself differently, speak differently, exist differently in space. Your energy becomes contained rather than dispersed. Instead of radiating nervous chatter, desperate validation seeking, and anxious availability, you emanate calm, self-possession, comfortable mystery, and selective engagement. Others feel this shift on a subconscious level. You no longer apologize for taking up space, for having thoughts, for existing in the room. Your silence becomes a form of self-respect that others can sense and feel compelled to match. When you stop diminishing yourself through excessive words, others stop diminishing you through their assumptions. The person you're becoming doesn't need external validation because they've learned to validate themselves. They don't need others to fill silence because they've learned to be comfortable with quiet. They don't need constant verbal connection because they've developed a relationship with their own inner world that's more interesting than most conversations. This shift from external to internal validation is perhaps the most powerful change of all. When you stop needing others to confirm your worth through their attention to your words, you become truly free. Free from the exhausting performance of constant communication. Free from the desperate need to be heard. Free from the anxiety that comes with wondering whether your words matter to anyone else. Your presence becomes enough. Not your words, not your performance, not your entertainment value, just your simple existence in space. This is a kind of power that can't be taught through books or gained through effort. It can only be developed through the patient cultivation of self-worth that doesn't depend on external confirmation. When you finally do speak after weeks, months of strategic silence, your words land like thunder in a quiet room. People remember what you say because you've taught them that your voice is rare, valuable, worth preserving. You've transformed from someone who talks to fill space into someone whose words can change the room's entire atmosphere. The contrast between your former self and your transformed self is stark and undeniable. Your words, now rare and carefully chosen, carry a weight they never possessed when they flowed freely and frequently. When you speak after meaningful silence, people lean in. They sense that something important is about to be shared, that your words have been carefully considered, that your thoughts have been filtered through wisdom rather than impulse. The room changes when you choose to break your quiet. Your voice becomes an event rather than background noise. People remember what you said long after the conversation ends because your words felt significant, purposeful, worth remembering. You've created a new relationship between yourself and communication, one based on power rather than desperation, choice rather than compulsion, quality rather than quantity. You are no longer the person who spoke to avoid silence, who filled space with words because emptiness felt uncomfortable. You've become someone who speaks to create impact, who uses words as tools of precision, who understands that true communication happens not in the multiplication of words, but in their careful selection and strategic deployment. The transformation is complete not when others notice your silence, but when you no longer feel the compulsive need to break it. When you can sit in quiet without anxiety, exist in conversations without constantly contributing, be present without proving your worth through words, then you've truly reclaimed your power from the noise of your own voice. You've learned the most important lesson about communication. It's not about being heard by everyone. It's about being worth hearing by anyone.